I have a podcast where I talk about, how AI is going to potentially have a negative impact on jobs and everything else, but I use AI so I don't have to hire anyone. It hasn't captured my voice and the way I am yet. It's probably the very first one that's as close to, I think, talking to a human as you can probably get. If you create a really interesting prompt that you think other people might be able to use, you can add it to the community. So you can go in and you can find other really interesting prompts that other people have written.
Creator Magic Podcast.
Just before we get into the episode, would you do me a huge favor and hit the subscribe button? Wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast, subscribing really helps the show to grow. And now, let's get into the episode.
Hey, Mike.
I'm a big fan of the podcast you're putting out there. You've got the Creatives with AI podcast, and you're also the creative director at With AI FM. And my experience of you and seeing what you do online is you try to automate as much as you can in your content creation. So how is that going for you?
I started off my first podcast, which was Creatives with AI, about a year ago. All I had was a mic and a webcam, which I'm on at the minute. And I could record an episode. And back then, I think I used Podium, which is a transcribing tool. So you can basically take your audio, you upload it into Podium, it creates your transcript for you, it creates all your show notes and all that sort of stuff. And I used Podium for a long time. The platform that we're using to record this right now, which is Riverside, Riverside's had tools. I don't think they had them when I started, but they do now, that are actually really, really good at going in and finding, the interesting clips to create social clips out of recordings and that sort of thing. And their AI tool themselves, there is some irony in it, which I think I've said to you before, which is, I have a podcast where I talk about, how AI is going to potentially have a negative impact on jobs and everything else, but I use AI so I don't have to hire anyone.
It's an incredible existence to live in, isn't it? Where as creatives, we love the fact that we can use tools to replace a lot of what we do, but we're also well aware that we're replacing jobs that we used to pay for, such as, I remember back when I started podcasting, I would hire a virtual assistant back in the day to listen to the show, to summarize things, and write me a post that could go out on the WordPress site that I had. But now you're saying things like Podium and certainly Riverside, which is an amazing tool. It will record your show. It will summarize everything. The transcripts are incredible. I think 99.9% accurate. Then it writes you the show notes. And as you rightly say, it produces the shorts that you can share on social media. But I'm confident that those creators that really want to augment their skills can do so. And I'm sure you've experienced that with these tools. Tell me a little bit about Cast Magic, because you mentioned before we started recording the show, that's one of the tools you're most fond of. How are you using Cast Magic?
Basically, you can take audio or video, and once it's recorded, you upload it into the platform. It has a series, it has different preset prompts in the system. So if you say, I want this to be for YouTube, or I want this to be for my podcast, or I want it to be meeting notes. So it'll do things like, top 3 points, or, your talking points. It'll have summaries. It'll have Twitter posts, or X, or whatever we're calling it this week. LinkedIn posts, that sort of stuff. But what's really interesting is it also has a community prompt area in it. So if you create a really interesting prompt that you think other people might be able to use, you can add it to the community section. So you can go in and you can find other really interesting prompts that other people have written, and you can bring that into yours and save it. So it's one of the prompts that gets done in your sort of template that you use for all of your shows. Not only does it do all of that, but it also will go and create your social clips as well. So you can do things like grab quotes, and it'll create your posts for you with the quotes written in. And it has an AI tool that will create your backgrounds and all your graphics and everything. So it's got a lot of different elements in it. And the cost is basically the same of the tool that I was using before that only does about a third of that.
I'm incredibly interested in the automation of social media, because that's one of the things certainly I struggle with as a creator. I'm making all this content and I'm having fun doing it, and then I forget all about it. I've hit the publish button and then it's done, and then my process kind of falls apart. And it sounds like a lot of these tools can deal with that. I'm curious, David, how much autonomy you give those tools to speak on your behalf.
For things like social posts and stuff like that, I give it zero autonomy. I do still read everything because every time I look at something, it hasn't captured my voice and the way I am yet. And I don't know if that's just because I haven't used, like Podium, I've used for nearly a year. And I would have thought that by this time it could have worked out, because I ask it to rewrite things or to change it or whatever. And then I even edit it once I've done that. And I would have thought they would be better, but they're not there yet in my experience. I absolutely feel your pain with particularly the long tail of content. I'm just coming up on my 1-year anniversary. I've got shows that I recorded a year ago that I don't talk about. I don't do anything. I don't promote those shows anymore. And it's only because, it's because the most recent thing is the most exciting, isn't it? And doing that long tail stuff is really difficult and going back. But there's a whole wealth of content. I mean, I can't even imagine how much content you've got to go back through your back catalog. So, do you know what I mean? And I totally appreciate that. And I'm really hoping that we get a tool soon that you'll be able to kind of give it one command and say, look, your only job is to troll through all of my old content, find stuff that is interesting or relevant. Could be, it was recently Mother's Day. I could have had something where we talked about Mother's Day in the past, and it would have been the perfect opportunity to pull a clip out of that comment and post it on social media because it was relevant. So I'm really hoping that we get some tools like that are a little bit more useful as more of like a personal assistant or a virtual assistant. That's really what I'm holding out for.
That feels like it could be available quite soon, especially with context windows getting bigger. One of the experiences I've had myself is few shot training, where you'll write a prompt and you'll put in, here are 3 examples of how I write. Please write something. And then it gets closer. But then I still feel that there are very AI things that happen if we're talking about social media posts, like it'll surround titles with emojis that I would never use. And it will use words like unleashing, diving, delving. And I'm like, no. So have you had any experience? I know you're obviously a big fan of OpenAI and their ChatGPT product. Do you customize the way you're prompting ChatGPT at all with either custom GPTs or writing custom instructions to try and get really good stuff to help market the content you create?
I do have some private custom GPTs that I've built for things that I do all the time. And then it just makes it easier. It saves time. And I don't have to put in all the prompt instructions. I have another sort of secret YouTube channel that I do. I do this crazy diet, and it's about my diet. And but I summarize all my videos using it. So I grab that out of DaVinci Resolve, and then I just go to my GPT and I dump it in there, and it creates exactly what I want. So I've tweaked it over time so that it gives me the YouTube description that I want, that's as long as I want, and it creates my YouTube titles and stuff in the style and the format that I want.
I don't know about you. I feel we're living now in an age, since AI has really peaked up, where we just have information overload. There's no scarcity anymore of information. So I've seen trends, for instance, where people have said, online courses that I've created years ago are now, they're dying. They're losing so much income because someone can go to ChatGPT or another AI and get the answers they need. So I feel more in the future as a content creator, it's going to be about that human connection. What do you feel about that?
No, I totally agree. And I think that's the future. And I agree with you as well, and I understand it. A lot of that, times change. That content, even though it may have been well performing for a long time, it's not always going to be there, and things change quickly. And particularly in the AI conversations that I have, obviously the conversations we're having now are very different than the conversations we had a year ago, and it keeps me on my toes, because every day, people are coming at me saying, "Oh, what do you think about this?" And I'm like, God, I hadn't even seen that. And I've got so many WhatsApp groups, I can't even tell you, that are all so many AI WhatsApp groups, and they're all, sharing different information. And I have, through the With AI FM network that I've got, I have the 2 shows I have at the minute are Creatives with AI, which was my first show. And then we have Women with AI, which is specifically focuses on the challenges I think that women are facing and are going to face because of how AI is changing the face of work. And And the next one, I have two more in the pipeline. So by later this year, I don't want to say which one's going to be first, but I suspect I'll have a couple more shows. One maybe around like smart cities and kind of placemaking and urban design and how that can impact cities. And then another one maybe around education, but we'll see.
And I'm curious, maybe that's a good pivot into the final thing I'm going to ask you, as to how real we can get when we're talking to AI, whether it's as a creative trying to brainstorm some ideas. I know we briefly touched on the fact that often AI will come out with very generic answers and, fluffy writing styles that are nothing like us. But I know you've had a lot of conversations with Pi AI.
Pi is amazing. And I think the company's actually been bought by Microsoft now, but that's just part of all the stuff happening in the background. But the difference with Pi is Pi was trained on conversations, not on books. So a lot of the OpenAI, the core training that it went through in the beginning was on academic texts and all of that, because it was really a university project when it started in the very beginning. And they've been working on this for like over a decade. It's not like this company popped up out of nowhere. But the Pi used conversations and real human conversations to train its model on. So when you talk to it, it's scarily like talking to a human. And you kind of think at some point there's going to be a convergence between the knowledge and the power that you get from the OpenAI model with the conversational aspect that Pi has on top of it. I actually did an interview on the podcast with Pi. I just got into a conversation with it because I thought it was really interesting, and you can just put it on your mobile phone and talk to it like anything else. And if you leave it, I don't know if you know this, but if you leave it for a couple of days, it'll actually prompt you and like kind of say, hey, are you okay? Do you want to have a chat? It's pretty weird. But there's some other ones that are like that, they're really working on the idea of a virtual assistant and trying to make it more realistic and where you can just talk to it. I know Google did a demo of this, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, where you could call up the assistant and it would call a restaurant and make a booking for you, and it would just sound like a human, and the people in the restaurant didn't even know that it was an AI. So I think that's coming as well. But Pi is probably the very first one that's as close to, I think, talking to a human as you can probably get.
Pi is so human in the responses it gives. And like you say, the follow-ups and the things it remembers about you are really freaky, because you will have these conversations. I like talking to Pi as well. I'll often do it when I'm on a run or doing some exercise, and it'll say, oh, you were asking me about that before. Well, here's something. And I'm like, wow, okay. And it just makes you realize how much data you spill out on a daily basis, not just to AI, but to every single service you use. This has been a super fascinating conversation, David. I'm really excited for people to check you out. The final thing I want to just wrap up with is there any part of your content creation process that you're still looking to automate, or you talk to a lot of creatives on your show that you want to have there for you to make life better? Anything that's not quite automated as you'd like yet?
Going back to what I said before, I think the only thing really that I would like to automate more is the downstream social media aspect of being able to continue to promote things that I've done in the past that sort of just get forgotten about. And I think that's the thing. It could be blog posts, it could be LinkedIn posts, it could be social posts, it could be, it could be podcasts or YouTube videos or whatever that is having a tool that could look at what's going on in the world and say, oh, actually, there's some relevant content that could match with that, and then just pop it up on the spur of the moment and push it out. And I think I don't think we're far from that. And if anybody decides to make a startup that does that, I'll only take 4%. But yeah, I mean, I get a feeling that there's, one of the platforms that you can already use to schedule social media posts and stuff like that. It would totally make sense for them to build something in like that and just say, we now have your entire back catalog and we can go and continue to do posts on your behalf.
I love it. Thank you so much, David. It's been an incredible conversation. And if people want to find you and see more of what you do, where would you send them to?
Well, for the podcast and all the conversations that we have, it's just, I think the best one is with AI.fm. That's the main site. And then you can find all of the podcasts and everything hanging off the back of that. And if you look for me on LinkedIn, good luck, I'm David Brown. You'll never find me. It's for DM Brown. I think is my handle on LinkedIn.
Thanks so much for checking out this episode of the Creator Magic podcast. Would you like to get a weekly email with all the latest AI tools I find? If so, head over to mrc.fm/Creator Magic and hit subscribe to get my weekly email newsletter. That's mrc.fm/Creator Magic.